Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow ferry ride through the fog toward one of the most notorious places in American history, Alcatraz Island. You know it from movies, maybe from the stories about gangsters and impossible escapes. But tonight we're not here for the official history. We're here for the shadows, the whispers, the moments that don't make it into the guidebooks. From the deck of the boat, the island doesn't look especially large, but it rises out of the water like something that was built to be separate from the world. And that's exactly what it was. Even before the prison days, there were warnings about this place, stories that the land itself didn't welcome the living. You can feel it as you get closer, the damp air thickening, the sound of the waves turning hollow as they slap against the rocky shore. You probably wouldn't make it out of this one, not if the stories are true. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ferry slows, and the outline of the prison looms ahead, rows of windows, most dark, some glinting faintly as if lit from within. You step off onto the dock, the boards slick beneath your shoes. The gulls are loud here, but every so often, there's a pause, a strange hush, like the island is holding its breath. That's the moment you realize this place isn't just empty buildings and rusting fences. It feels awake. And tonight, you're going to learn what it remembers. Long before cell blocks and guard towers, Alcatraz was already a place people approached with caution. For centuries, the Ohlone people, native to the San Francisco Bay Area, spoke of the island in hushed tones. According to some accounts, they saw it as a place where evil spirits gathered, a rocky outpost haunted by the restless dead. The island was barren, windswept, and surrounded by cold, treacherous water, an isolated lump of rock that seemed inhospitable to human life. In some oral traditions, it was a place where the souls of the dead lingered, unable to cross over. Others described it as a kind of spiritual prison, where dangerous entities were banished to keep them away from the living. You picture it then not as a tourist attraction, not even as a fortress, but as a wild, empty rock shrouded in fog, the sound of waves echoing through cracks in the cliffs. No walls or bars needed here. The isolation itself was the cage. The Ohlone avoided camping or hunting on Alcatraz unless absolutely necessary. When they did land, it was often for purposes of banishment or penance. A wrongdoer might be taken here and left alone for a set period, forced to endure the cold winds and the eerie solitude. And sometimes, those left here didn't come back the same. One unsettling story tells of a banished man who returned weeks later, his hair gone white, muttering about figures in the mist. He spoke of voices calling his name from the rocks, and of a woman's shadow moving along the cliffs at night. The elders decided never to send anyone alone to the island again. Some folklorists wonder if the island's grim reputation influenced its later use. Perhaps the military, and later, the government chose Alcatraz not just for its isolation, but because it already carried an aura of fear, a psychological edge that would make escape or rebellion seem unthinkable. Even now, visitors who know nothing of this history sometimes step off the ferry and shiver without knowing why. Maybe it's the wind, or maybe it's the echo of an older fear, one that's been part of this island long before anyone thought to build a prison here. Before Alcatraz became the infamous penitentiary we all imagine, it was a military outpost, an imposing fortress meant to guard San Francisco Bay. By the mid-1800s, stone walls, gun batteries, and barracks transformed the island into something more than just a lonely rock. Cannons pointed outward toward the open sea, and soldiers paced along the battlements, scanning for enemy ships that never came. But isolation works on soldiers the same way it does on prisoners. Weeks could pass with nothing to do but drill, clean, and wait. And in that stillness, strange stories began to circulate. One of the earliest recorded hauntings dates back to the Civil War era. Guards on the night shift spoke of hearing heavy boots pacing in the empty watchtowers, the rhythmic thud of each step echoing in the dark. When challenged, the footsteps would stop, only to resume moments later from a completely different location. The old guardhouse itself had a reputation for unease. Soldiers claimed to hear the clinking of chains in the basement, even though no prisoners were held there at the time. A sergeant in 1867 reportedly refused to spend another night on the island after seeing what he described as a man with hollow eyes standing in a storage room. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared before fading into the brick wall behind him. Another oft-whispered tale involved the powder magazine. Ammunition was stored deep within the fortress, and sentries stationed nearby would occasionally report a sudden, sharp drop in temperature, even in the heat of summer. One guard insisted that he'd seen a shadowy hand slide along the wall beside him, only to vanish when he turned his lantern toward it. Some historians think these stories were nothing more than products of boredom and isolation, but others point out that Alcatraz had already been the site of punishment, banishment, and hardship long before the army arrived, and perhaps the soldiers were just the latest to feel its weight. By the time the military prison was established in 1868, the island already had a century of whispered warnings woven into its stone, and those whispers would only grow louder when the U.S. Department of Justice took over Alcatraz in 1934. The island's purpose shifted from military stronghold to the most feared federal penitentiary in the country. The change brought with it an entirely different kind of energy, one made of tension, desperation, and the constant clash of dangerous personalities. This wasn't a place for minor offenders. Alcatraz became the end of the line for inmates who caused trouble at other prisons, career criminals, escape artists, and violent men with nothing left to lose. Names like Al Capone, Machine Gun, Kelly, and Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, gave the place its infamous reputation. From the moment the prison opened, the building seemed to feed off the unrest inside. Guards complained of sudden drafts and disembodied footsteps in newly renovated corridors. Inmates spoke of waking in the night to find shadowy figures moving just outside the bars, even when the guards were nowhere near their block. One particularly unsettling rumor among prisoners was that something roamed the cell blocks at night, something that wasn't a guard or an inmate, a tall, dark shape that would stop at certain cells and linger, as though peering in. The unlucky ones said they'd feel a sudden, crushing weight in their chest when it happened, making it impossible to call out. The prison's strict routine did little to quiet the stories. If anything, the rigid schedule's lights out at 9:30. Cells locked until morning gave the strange events more room to breathe. Once the lights dimmed and the clanging of the last barred door echoed away, the silence of the place became almost unbearable. That was when the whispers started. Some guards dismissed it all as prisoner superstition, a way to spook newcomers. But others, especially those who worked nights, kept their own uneasy counsel. One former officer, interviewed years later, admitted, "There were nights I walked the tier and felt eyes on me the whole time. Not inmate eyes, something else." As the years went on, certain parts of Alcatraz developed their own reputations, places even the toughest men preferred to avoid after dark. And at the top of that list was the infamous D Block. D Block was the prison's isolation unit, 13 cells, where inmates were sent for punishment, each one a cramped concrete box with only the bare essentials. To the prisoners, it was known simply as the Hole. And even among the hard men of Alcatraz, it had a reputation for breaking spirits. The cells were colder here, with tiny windows that let in little light. Time in D Block meant hours of silence, punctuated only by the occasional clang of a distant door or the shuffle of a guard's footsteps. But it wasn't just the emptiness that made the place unsettling. It was the feeling that someone else was in there with you. Over the years, inmates and guards alike told of a shadowy figure that roamed the block at night. Some saw it drifting past the bars, a human-like silhouette darker than the darkness around it. Others felt it standing in the corner of their cell, just out of sight, waiting. One story from the 1940s still gets repeated on tours. An inmate was locked in one of the Hole cells for misbehavior. Not long after lights out, he began screaming, claiming that a creature with glowing eyes was in there with him. Guards dismissed it as a ploy for attention until his shouts turned to desperate pleas for help. And then, silence. When they checked the next morning, they found him dead, with no obvious cause. Some whispered that his face was twisted in terror, as though he'd seen something unspeakable. Even today, D Block feels wrong to many who visit. Tour guides speak of sudden temperature drops, and guests have reported feeling as if unseen hands brushed against their arms. Some have walked into the block with fully charged audio equipment, only for it to drain instantly as they try to record. Skeptics chalk it up to the oppressive atmosphere, a mix of poor lighting, cold drafts, and suggestive history. But those who've stood alone in D Block at night say there's no mistaking it. The air thickens, the silence deepens, and somewhere in the shadows, something is still watching. Cell 14D sits at the far end of D Block, and if you believe the stories, it's the most haunted spot in the entire prison. Even in daylight, stepping inside feels like walking into a cave. The air is heavy, stale, and colder than the hallway just outside. Visitors often remark on the sudden temperature drop, sometimes as much as 20 degrees. When the prison was active, 14D was one of the strip cells. Inmates sent here had their clothes taken away, their mattresses removed at dawn, and the only furnishings were a sink, a toilet, and the concrete floor. Meals were pushed through a small slot in the door. Former guards say there was something off about this cell even back then. Men who spent time there, hardened criminals who laughed at punishment, often emerged pale and shaken, refusing to talk about what had happened inside. One guard remembered an inmate who spent 3 days in 14D. When released, he refused to re-enter the cell for a routine inspection, muttering, "It's in there." The most famous story tied to 14D involves a prisoner in the early 1940s. Locked inside for a serious infraction, he began yelling that a man with glowing eyes was in the cell with him. The guards ignored him at first, but the screams turned to frantic cries for help, then choked gasps, and then nothing. When they checked in the morning, the man was dead. Officially, it was ruled accidental. Some claimed heart failure, but those who saw his face said it was frozen in sheer terror. Today, 14D remains a magnet for paranormal investigators. EMF meters spike unexpectedly. Cameras pick up flickers of light that shouldn't be there. Some visitors refuse to step inside after just a moment at the threshold. If you linger in the cell, you might notice the sound of faint breathing that doesn't match your own, or feel the weight of unseen eyes studying you from the darkest corner. And if you stay too long, you might leave with the same haunted look as the prisoners who once swore they weren't alone in there. They call it the hole, like the word itself might swallow you if you say it too loud. You stand outside the heavy steel door and feel the cold slip through the seams, a draft with the attitude of a crossed guard. There's a particular story the rangers don't always tell, at least not on daytime tours. It's the one the island keeps under its tongue about the inmate who didn't make it through the night. No one agrees on his name. That's part of why the story works its way under your skin. He's a shape in the dark, rather than a face you can file away. Some versions place him in the early 40s, others a few years later. In every telling, he's locked down after lights out for fighting, mouthing off, or just refusing the machinery of routine. He's shoved into solitary, with a grumble that starts as bravado and ends as something a little thinner. You step into 14D's neighbor, one of the punishment cells without a window, and the air changes the way a room changes after a good argument. The floor is steel, the walls chalk cold, and the silence doesn't feel earned, it feels imposed. They say the guard slid the door shut, spun the wheel, and the block inhaled like it always did at night, settling into the long rhythm between coughs and clanks. Then the yelling began. At first, it's the usual, a man unloading on a door that doesn't love him back. But the pitch turns. Witnesses' cellmates on the tier, a guard with a long memory, depending on who's telling, say the inmate started begging to be moved. Someone's in here. That line shows up in almost every version. Someone, not something. A person-shaped problem. Here's the local variant you'll hear from an older ranger if you linger after a tour. The prisoner shouted that a man with bright eyes was in the far corner, standing perfectly still, not glowing bright, like light striking glass beneath water. Another variant popular with boat captains who ferry the last visitors off has the figure crouched near the floor vent, whispering the prisoner's name the way a tide whispers to rock, over and over, until the rock forgets it was meant to be hard. Either way, nobody opens the door. Discipline is discipline, and night is night. The yelling spikes into panic. Inmates bang on their own bars like a percussion section in a band no one would pay to see. Look, solitary doesn't come with a soundtrack. You make do. A guard storms down, threatens silence, hears the fear in the noise, and this part is debated either peers through the wicket or refuses to look at all. Some say he sees 2 shadows when there should be 1. Some say he hears a dragging sound in a room where nothing's allowed to move. Then, just before dawn, everything stops. not calms, stops. The kind of silence that makes your ears lean forward. Morning brings the ritual. Keys, wheel, a door that doesn't want to be helpful. They find the inmate on the floor. No bruises worth a report. No marks the morgue can hang a certainty on. The official line will be shock, seizure, heart failure, pick a clinical synonym for couldn't take it. But the faces of the men who saw him make a different kind of paperwork. He looks like someone who realized, too late, that the dark was not empty. There's an obscure interpretation that crops up among radio buffs and amateur historians, the kind who could rebuild a telegraph from a lunchbox. They argue the hole was a kiln for human suggestion. Put a man alone with the resonant thrum of generators and the occasional bone vibration from foghorns, and you can cook a hallucination to order. The bright eyes, reflections from a guard's flashlight hitting rivets or mica in the paint. The whispers, air slipping through vents like a mouth through teeth. That theory has the tidy charm of a perfectly coiled cable. It also collapses when you ask why the cold spot still rolls out of these cells like fog, and why modern recorders, digital, insulated, indifferent, still catch a single syllable after midnight. A breath like, "Hey, that isn't yours." A second obscure theory is less comfortable. The inmate wasn't alone because he never was. Not in the way you think. Some sensitives claim Alcatraz's solitary cells act like convergence nodes, places where memory presses so hard into matter that it folds. The thing he saw, if he saw anything, wasn't a stranger, but a future, him collapsing backward through the seam in time, terrified because he could feel the end and couldn't warn himself. I know, that's a lot to bring on a ferry, but spend 10 minutes in the dark down here and see if your sense of time doesn't loosen a notch. And then there's the unresolved debate, the one that keeps the story breathing. Was there ever a death that night at all? Some archivists will tell you the rosters don't match the tale, that nobody died in solitary the way the legend insists. Others counter that paperwork on an island like this wears two faces, one for Washington, one for the men who had to sleep here. There's a letter kept in a private collection, cited by two separate docents, that mentions a regrettable incident and a subsequent quieting of reports. Is that proof? No. Is it deliciously suspicious? Absolutely. Alcatraz. Come for the views, stay for the administrative ambiguities. You stand at the threshold and let your eyes adjust until the black turns grainy. I'll give you a gentle joke for your nerves. Yes, your phone flashlight would help. And no, shining it won't make you braver. It'll just make the dark look like it's waiting for its turn. Second, you tell yourself you'd have kept your cool if you'd been locked in here, because apparently you are a very impressive person in hypothetical scenarios. Third, you promise you'd never yell at shadows, while inching 1 foot back toward the hallway, just because your survival instincts enjoy participating. The guide's voice filters down the block, careful, respectful. They don't linger on the inmate. They pivot to policy, to procedure, to close doors that stayed closed even when the night got teeth. But the story follows you like a cold draft. You pass the row of cells and feel one patch of air that is wrong. Not cooler in the cheap jacket sense, but denser, like breath you didn't exhale pressing against your lips. In some retellings, men on the tier dream the same dream for weeks after. A pair of eyes suspended at knee height, like someone sitting with their back to the wall, patient as the tide. In others, the guards hear metal clicking in an empty cell, the steady beat of a ring against bars. Married, not married, no one agrees. The ring, like the name, refuses to settle. Is the hole haunted because a man died in it? Or because 1,000 nights of fear rubbed the shine off reality and let something older show through? That's the part we don't solve. Maybe the island amplifies whatever you bring. Maybe the Olone warnings were less about a devil on the rock and more about a pressure in the place that wakes devils in people. Maybe the man in the dark saw exactly what he said he saw. Maybe he saw himself. Maybe the hole in the story is the shape of the cell itself. You step back into the corridor, and the light feels like a favor. The door slides shut, with a sound that makes your shoulders rise to meet your ears. The block goes quiet, then remembers its scripts, the gulls, the distant ferry horn, a tour guide's nervous laugh that is not for the crowd, but for the tinny echo that answered her from a cell she swears was empty. You walk on, and the island does that trick it's famous for. It lets you think you've left something behind, then tucks it in your pocket for later. Tonight, with the fan humming and the house pretending not to have corners, You'll lie there and try to remember the inmate's name. You won't. The dark prefers its martyrs anonymous, but you will remember the part that matters. He wasn't alone. You tilt your head back and follow the catwalks with your eyes thin, ribbed walkways that cling to the cell house walls like steel vines. These were the gun galleries, high perches where armed guards paced with rifles, watching the tiers below. From up there, a single cough could hush a block, and a single shot could end an uprising before it had the courtesy to fully form a plan. Even now, the galleries command a hush. It's the altitude of authority. But lately, it's also the altitude of something else, something that keeps walking its route long after the last whistle blew. Day tours rarely linger on the galleries. Liability, distance, the whole, let's not encourage anyone to develop an acrophobia on a federal landmark thing. But stand beneath them, and you'll understand why the stories cling. Metal remembers. It keeps the rhythm of boot heels, even when no one's dressed for work. You find yourself counting out 8 paces. Pause. 8 paces back. As if you've joined a ghost drill you were never issued orders for. The well-known variant goes like this. A ranger closing up one evening glances up to the west gallery and sees a guard in a khaki shirt and tie, hat brim casting a neat shadow. The figure is half turned toward the block, hands tucked into his belt, posture practiced. The ranger looks down to radio a colleague because men in uniforms, where men in uniforms shouldn't be, are never the casual surprise they sound like. And when he looks back, the gallery is empty. No footfalls, no ladder creak, no exit. Just a slow sway in the safety chain, like someone had brushed past it on their way to somewhere you can't go. Different ranger, different year. The same figure, this time walking toward the corner. He pivots, starts to cross the narrow span to the adjacent gallery, right across a gap that no longer has a bridge. 2 steps into thin air and he's gone, leaving only a hingeless shadow where the catwalk used to meet the wall. You feel the polite tap of goose flesh along your forearms, like your skin is trying to raise its hand and ask for clarification. There's an obscure interpretation that pops up among archivists who love blueprints more than small talk. They argue that what people are seeing is a residual loop, the guard's patrol route imprinted into the steel, playing back along the path as it existed then, not as it exists now. The vanished bridge? Not a mistake, just a mismatch in eras. Think of it like a film projector jammed into the wrong reel. The image keeps walking where the world no longer does. Another obscure theory, beloved by radio folks and a couple of electricians who can't resist a mystery, is that the galleries act like literal antennae. All that rigid metal framing, all those right angles perfect for catching and holding stray electromagnetic energy. Under the right conditions, weather, humidity, the bay throwing a tantrum, the structure might play back, sound and light, in ways that look like people. It's a theory with charm. It also fails to explain why, on more than one occasion, the figure has allegedly paused to look down at a specific inmate's former cell, as if remembering a problem that needed a second look. Guards in the old days sometimes complained of being watched from the galleries. That sounds backward, until you picture night rounds, the tiers dimmed, the galleries a deeper stripe of shadow above. An officer on the floor hears a faint clink and looks up, sees nothing, tells himself it was settling metal, then hears a soft clearing of a throat, one of those human noises that is as much intention as it is sound. He hurries his pace, because no one likes being managed by a colleague who isn't on the schedule. The joke among officers, gentle joke coming in hot, was that Alcatraz had the best supervisor-to-staff ratio in the country, 1 living to 2 dead. Tourists have their own variant. A woman reviewing photos at lunch notices a figure in the background, perched above the block neat cap, squared shoulders. She swears there was no costumed interpreter on duty. A second photo, taken seconds later from the same angle, shows only the lattice of the catwalk and a skein of sea wind sneaking through. The figure's face, when zoomed, is a smudge where a face should be, like the camera refused to cooperate with identification. There's one story that wears well because it doesn't step on any toes. A volunteer archivist, alone after hours scanning intake ledgers in a little office off the cell house, hears metal footsteps above her. She assumes maintenance until the steps fall into a pattern she recognizes from a 1940s post order she'd just transcribed. 12 paces, pause. 6 paces to the corner, pause. Lean, observe, move on. She stands, curiosity winning its endless tug of war with caution, and calls up, "You good?" The steps stop immediately. A moment later, 2 slow taps on the railing. Not ominous, more like, yes, noted. Then, silence, efficient as a checklist. Some claim the gallery guard isn't a single spirit at all, but a composite every man who ever did the job, layered into one expectation-shaped presence. Others swear it's one particular officer who died off-island, still overly committed to the idea that posts don't abandon themselves. The debate never resolves, which is fine. Alcatraz has always loved an argument that can walk on its own 2 feet for decades. Stand beneath the East Gallery by D Block, and you'll feel the cold change personality. It's not the morgue's knife-edge chill or the pool of air cold of a stone stare. It's a wake of coolness, something moving through the air and displacing it. On some nights, you'll catch the faint peppery smell of gun oil, a scent mostly extinct in a retired prison. If your nose reports old pennies and ghosts, congratulations. You are overachieving at atmospheric participation. Every so often, a visitor hears the click of a safety being tested, a tiny mechanical syllable that locks right into the part of your brain wired for caution. Gooseflesh again, another raised hand. In one ranger's retelling, that click is followed by the unmistakable sound of a round being chambered. He freezes because even stage sounds in federal buildings are not a known hobby and calls out, "Safe?" A whisper from above, "Safe." He checks the galleries. No one there. The tape recorder in his pocket later plays back only static and the faraway sigh of the bay. Here's your soft sarcasm to keep the breathing steady. If you're the sort who likes to wave at everything, trains, parade floats, existential dread, resist the urge to salute the galleries. It's adorable, but if something up there salutes back, you'll set a new personal record for speed walking, and I want you to be proud of that before it happens. Second, remember that the catwalks once meant order. The presence people report isn't snarling, it's supervising. Nothing says romance like spectral middle management. Third, if you hear pacing line up with your heartbeat, that's normal. That's just your body deciding to collaborate with the architecture. It will pass when you move into the next room or when the pacing stops and you realize it wasn't you after all. There's an unresolved, deliciously petty debate among longtime staff. Is the gallery guard protective or punitive? Some insist the air warms a hair when school groups pass beneath, that the steps slow, almost proud, as if someone is pleased to see the block crowded with the safe kind of noise. Others swear the footsteps intensify when someone gets handsy with displays, that a sharp metallic rap rings out like a desk tap from an old-school teacher. Both can be true. Authority is complicated, even when it's made of memory. You look up one more time. Nothing moves. And yet, the sense of an outline hangs there, stitched into the lattice hat brim, shoulder line, hands resting just so. The gallery is empty because you are in the wrong decade to see it full. You take a step, and somewhere above, something takes one too, in the other direction, as if giving you room. Alcatraz doesn't always push. Sometimes it just posts a watch and lets you know, by the most economical means possible, that you are seen. You step into the corridor outside solitary, and the first thing you notice isn't the cold. It's the way sound behaves like it's got a record to settle. Every small noise seems personal. Your shoes discover an echo they didn't know they owned. A distant drip lands with courtroom confidence. Somewhere, metal breathes. You tell yourself it's pipes. The pipes tell you they prefer not to be blamed for everything. At Alcatraz, the sounds of solitary are their own legend. People talk about the shadows, the cold spots, the figures at the end of the tier, yes. But what keeps visitors glancing back over their shoulders is the audio. Sobbing where no one stands, low whispering that refuses to resolve into words, the steady clink of a ring or a spoon or a coin tapping bars at a rhythm the body remembers but the mind can't quite place. The guards called it night talk, not the inmates, not the living the block talking to itself after lights out. Even now, with the cells empty and the tier-turned museum quiet, the block maintains a bedtime routine. A shuffle, a murmur, a clang from too far down to be helpful. You stand at the threshold to D block and let the hush settle. The tour thins out, shoes fade away, and a new layer surfaces. A soft, low sound, like someone trying not to be heard crying. It isn't theatrical. There's no big spooky crescendo. It's just there. It threads under the air the way a foghorn threads under a dream. It's the kind of sound your body recognizes first. Your shoulders fold in a little, like they're trying to keep the warmth in. Ask 3 rangers about the sobbing, and you'll get 3 different maps to the same noise. One will tell you it's a draft slipping through vents, pulling the air across rust so it hums human. Another will nod and say, yes, it's been heard since the 1930s, and it always comes from a cell that's technically behind you, no matter where you're standing. A third will shrug and suggest you not listen too hard after dark, because if it sounds like someone you know, you're listening too hard. A well-known Alcatraz variant lives here too, overlapping like a double exposure. The reports of music in places where music makes no sense. Guests and staff have, for decades, claimed to hear a plucked string, a hesitant phrase, a little riff that comes and goes in the shower room and in quiet corners near Solitary. They say it's a banjo Capone's, of course Al Capone, who was allowed to play in the prison band during his time on the Rock. Whether he strummed in the showers for the acoustics or the solitude is an open question, but the legend insists you can still catch 2 or 3 scattered notes on winter afternoons, as if someone were warming up off stage and never finding the next chord. Gentle joke for the nerves. If you hear Sweet Home Chicago, that's a ranger with a good sense of humor. If you hear something that sounds like Please Don't Let Them Find Me, that's not on the set list. Back to Solitary. The clanging is its own creature. Sometimes it's crisp, like a small tool clipped against a bar. Sometimes it's the prolonged whine of metal rubbing metal, the exact length of a long breath. It comes in threes often enough that people decide threes mean something, though meanings vary. The Father, Son, and Holy Ghost for some, code for I'm still here for others. A retired officer swore that during the last winter, before the prison closed, the clanging matched his rounds 3 taps as he approached the end of the tier, 3 as he doubled back, 3 more when he stopped to log the time. He considered it rude at first, like being shadowed by a colleague with no sense of boundaries. By spring, he found it reassuring. You get used to being kept honest, he said, and laughed the laugh of a man who definitely didn't get used to it. An obscure interpretation has fans among acousticians. Infrasound. The bay pushes heavy air through vents and grates, the way an organ pushes it through pipes. Certain frequencies dip under human hearing, but still rattle the machinery of the body's stomach, hairs on your arms, the little bones in your ears that haven't had a day off since you were born. Infrasound can make you feel watched. It can tilt your balance, smear the edges of silence, conjure the impression of whispering where there's only wind-solving geometry problems. Down here, with hard corners and long runs of steel, the island might be playing you like an instrument. Second gentle joke. If Alcatraz is a tuba, you're the sheet music. Don't worry, you're in a minor key, it suits you. Another obscure stranger theory comes from sensitives who say Solitary holds accumulated intention. Not the dead themselves, but the concentrated pressure of thousands of nights of wanting. Wanting out, wanting quiet, wanting a name said by a human voice that didn't belong to a guard. They argue that the whispers you hear aren't messages, they're thirst. Standing in the hall, you're the glass on the counter. The room pours until you feel full. Then you walk away with someone else's sadness rattling the rim. There's an unresolved mystery that refuses to be archived properly, the count response. Former officers remember calling count in the dark count, and hearing an extra voice answer from the block. A clipped, automatic here that didn't match any man on the tier. Some officers treated it like a dare and called name, no answer. Others stopped calling count from that spot. When you ask the records people about it, they smile the way people smile when they would like you to be on your ferry now. Visitors supply their own debates. Were those whispers in English? Did they change languages when you walked past 14D? Did you hear your name, or did you hear the shape of your name? This place loves an almost a word, almost a phrase, almost a story. It keeps you leaning in until leaning in starts to feel like falling. Your audio recorder, because of course you brought one, crackles with a boredom it thinks is neutrality. Later, at home, you'll scrub the file for meaning and find a thin, silted syllable around the 8-minute mark that might be don't or might be breath meeting microphone. You will decide to be reasonable about it and then replay it 11 times, because reason is a team sport and you like the odds. Every so often, someone reports laughter in Solitary, not cruel, not joyful. A A single brief laugh, like someone at the far end of a hallway just remembered a joke from the transport boat and forgot they weren't allowed to be human here. You might hear it and think you imagined it. You might not hear it and think you did. 3 gentle wry observations before we step back into the light. First, if you do hear your name, congratulations, you're the main character. And also please leave. Second, if you don't hear anything, that doesn't mean nothing happened. It might mean Alcatraz respects your boundaries better than your group chat. Third, if your friend insists the clanging is obviously thermal expansion, let them have this small victory. You're going to need them to go first around the next corner. Stand very still now and listen. Beneath the gulls, beneath the tourism, there's a fiber in the air that hums with ordinary grief. The sobbing thins. The whispering pulls itself back through the lock like thread through a needle. The clink stops on its own schedule, which is older than yours. You take a breath and hear it bounce off the bars and come back to you as if it belonged here before you did. Is solitary haunted because men suffered here, or because the island's geometry traps certain sounds, the way a spider traps bugs indiscriminately, efficiently, without malice but without mercy? The debate doesn't settle. The noise doesn't either. That's the truth you carry out with you. The sound of Alcatraz is not finished making itself. You step into the corridor and the everyday returns footsteps, a ranger's radio, wind looking for a conversation. Behind you, the tear exhales. Somewhere deep in the block, something taps once, twice, 3 times, like a metronome, setting the tempo for a song you hope you never learn all the words to. Some parts of Alcatraz feel like they belong to the inmates. Others feel like they belong to the guards. But there's one section upstairs, past the cell houses, in an office with wide windows that still feels like it belongs to one man, Warden James A. Johnston. Johnston was the first warden of Alcatraz when it became a federal penitentiary in 1934. He was a strict reformer, a believer in discipline and rules, but also in fairness, at least by prison standards. He dressed impeccably, kept his hair neat, and was never seen without a press suit and tie. The inmates called him Old Saltwater behind his back, partly because of his constant presence and partly because of his weathered, serious expression. His office sat in the administration wing, with a view of the bay that was both beautiful and cruel. Guards said Johnston would sometimes stand there in the evenings, hands behind his back, staring out toward San Francisco as if daring the city to try and reach him. He oversaw every major change in the early days. The strict silence rule, the tier inspections, the work assignments. He walked the cell blocks with a calm, steady pace, and everyone, staff and prisoner alike, knew exactly when he was nearby. But here's the strange part. More than 60 years after his death, people say Warden Johnston still hasn't left. One of the best-known tales comes from a park ranger closing the admin wing late at night. She stepped into Johnston's old office to check the windows and swore she saw a man standing in the far corner, wearing a dark suit. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching her with an expression somewhere between curiosity and mild disapproval. Thinking she'd stumbled across an after-hours visitor, she started to explain the area was closed, but before she could finish, the figure simply wasn't there anymore. Another ranger, years later, described hearing slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the wooden floor above him when he knew the building was empty. The steps stopped directly overhead, paused as though the walker was looking out the window, then started again, circling the same path in a perfect loop. There's a local variant of this story where Johnston's ghost is less subtle. In this telling, visitors touring the office sometimes feel a sharp pressure between their shoulder blades, as if someone were straightening their posture. Others hear a low, clipped voice in their ear saying things like, "Move along," or "Not there." In one case, a man trying to lean over a display case was startled by the sudden smell of strong tobacco smoke, Johnston's signature pipe blend, though smoking has been banned for decades. The obscure theory here is tied to Johnston's personality, that he remains not out of malice, but out of duty. In life, he saw himself as the keystone that kept the prison functioning. In death, perhaps he's still walking his rounds, making sure things stay in order. This would explain why the experiences in his office aren't frightening so much as corrective. Guests often describe leaving with a strange feeling that they've just been inspected and, somehow, approved. Another, more unsettling interpretation is that the presence in Johnston's office isn't Johnston at all, but something older. using his image as a mask. Sensitive visitors have claimed that while the figure looks like the warden, the feeling in the room is colder, heavier, more territorial. One psychic swore the figure was rooted to the building, not to any human life, and that it wore Johnston's form because that was the strongest memory tied to this space. The unresolved debate is whether these experiences are unique to Johnston's room or bleed into the rest of the administration wing. Some staff insist the footsteps and shadows are confined to the office. Others claim to have seen the suited figure walking into the hallway and vanishing at the top of the stairs, as if on his way to inspect the cell house. If you ever visit, try this. Stand in the office with your back to the window and face the door. You might feel the faintest sense that you're taking someone else's place, that the spot you're in is reserved, and you're only borrowing it for a moment. If you catch yourself straightening your posture, smoothing your shirt, or suddenly feeling the need to clear your throat, well, maybe you're just being polite. Or maybe the warden is still making his rounds, and tonight you made the list. You leave the administration wing and follow the quiet corridor that dips toward the laundry building. The air changes here, not the sharp chill of the cell house, but a damp heaviness, as though the walls have been wringing themselves out for decades and the moisture never really leaves. Even before you reach the laundry room, you can hear it, the faint rattle of metal, a hum like machinery just starting to warm, and the slow, deliberate slap of wet fabric hitting a table. Of course, nothing runs here anymore. The washers are hulking, empty shells, their enamel worn thin in places, their round glass doors fogged with decades of grime. The air smells faintly of rust and salt, and yet the room sometimes feels busy. The laundry was one of the prison's most active workspaces. Inmates spent long hours sorting uniforms, washing bedding, pressing and folding clothing. There was noise, steam, and movement, a rhythm to it, almost like a factory. Even now, the space seems reluctant to let go of that energy. Rangers and maintenance workers report walking in to find the air warm, the way it gets when machines have been running, only to watch it cool rapidly, as if someone just flipped a switch. One well-known version of the haunting here involves a pair of men's voices, low, conversational, and impossible to make out clearly. Witnesses say they hear them coming from behind the long row of washers. The voices move as though their owners are walking side by side, talking quietly while they work. When someone rounds the machines to investigate, the space is empty, the voice is gone, replaced by the slow drip of condensation from the pipes overhead. A lesser-known, stranger story comes from a park maintenance worker who was checking the building after hours. He swore he saw a man in prison denim standing by one of the folding tables, smoothing out a sheet. The man didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, just kept folding. Thinking it was a reenactor or possibly a fellow worker in costume for an event, the man started to speak, then realized the figure's hands weren't touching the fabric at all. The sheet seemed to fold itself, the man's hands moving inches above it like they were guiding something that wasn't there. An obscure interpretation suggests these apparitions are residual echoes of daily work, replayed endlessly. But some experiences hint at intelligence. A few visitors have reported that when they linger too long at one of the display cases, they hear an impatient sigh, followed by a sudden cold draft, pushing them toward the exit. Others believe the laundry's hauntings are tied to the infamous 1946 Battle of Alcatraz. During the violent escape attempt, some of the most desperate fighting happened near the industrial buildings. While no confirmed deaths occurred in the laundry room itself, the chaos may have left an imprint: fear, adrenaline, confusion that still loops on certain days. One retired guard swore he heard the unmistakable sound of a Thompson submachine gun echoing faintly in the space, decades after the last weapon was fired here. The unresolved debate is whether the laundry apparitions are former inmates simply working their eternal shift, or if some of them are guards. The work crews were always overseen by officers, and some witnesses describe seeing figures with a more authoritative posture, hands clasped behind their backs, scanning the room. If you stand in the far corner of the laundry by the heavy mangle machine and close your eyes, you might catch it. The rhythmic roll of gears, the faint scent of soap, and the quiet shuffle of boots on damp concrete. It's tempting to tell yourself it's just the building settling. But when you open your eyes and notice the mangle's roller swaying slightly, as though it's just been nudged, you might wonder if the workday here never truly ended. You find the door by accident, the sort of metal panel that looks like it prefers not to be noticed. A ranger key turn, a patient hinge sigh, and there it is. A low, concrete throat running beneath the cell house, the utility corridor. Steam lines wrapped in tired insulation, electrical conduits stapled to the wall like veins. The air feels older here, like breath exhaled by the island itself and saved for later. Down you go. Your flashlight makes a tunnel inside the tunnel. Dust sketches slow galaxies in the beam. Somewhere far ahead, a drip keeps time for a song no one wants to learn. The ceiling is just low enough that the tall part of your mind stays slightly hunched, even if your spine insists on good posture. Gentle joke number 1. Your spine is an optimist. Your lizard brain is the building manager. People call these service runs the back hallways, as if Alcatraz had a front. In the old days, maintenance crews ghosted through here with wrenches and grease, unseen and mostly unthanked. Guards used them to move quietly between trouble and the rumor of trouble. During the 1946 Battle of Alcatraz, shots cracked over these lines like a thunderstorm arguing with a staircase. That history sits in the concrete like iron filings. And this is where the shadows live. The well-known version goes like this. Stand at the T-junction near C Block, and you'll see a figure cross from left to right. Slow as caution, solid enough to steal your light. Not a trick of dimness, an absence that behaves. Rangers have logged it for decades without logging it, if you know what I mean. 1, a decade on the job and not fond of fables. Watch the shape interrupt his flashlight beam, then continue past a stack of old ducting and out of the light, as if the dark down here were thicker and friendlier than the beam itself. He walked it down with the careful speed of a man who doesn't want to learn anything new. Turned the corner and found only pipe and the dull breath of the bay. Another Ranger's variant shifts the direction. Right to left, hat brim, shoulders, then a dip at the knees like a man taking a last-second step off a curb. The small details stay the same. No sound of boots, no scrape, no smell of cologne or sweat, just the sensation of a moving door through air. Visitors get their own share. A photographer setting a tripod for long exposures swears a silhouette slid into the frame, tall as the corridor, head cocked a fraction, and stayed long enough to register on 2 consecutive shots, but not on the third, taken immediately after. When she layered the images later, the figure lined up perfectly with a valve wheel that had no business looking like a skull. Gentle joke number 2. Congratulations, you've invented industrial pareidolia. The ghost will invoice you for usage rights. Not every shadow is upright. There's a story the electricians tell, the low thing. You catch it at shin height, a quick, fast shadow that cuts across the beam and makes your ankle invent new adjectives. It doesn't feel like an animal. Animals announce themselves with noise and smell. This is a swift subtraction. One crew chief describes it as, like someone slid a black file folder between me and the floor. When he swore and lifted the light, he found nothing but his own breath, proving it had places to be. On especially foggy nights, the corridor grows a heartbeat. The pipes pop, the insulation creaks, and a shape appears at the far end, broad, shoulderish, then thins to a line, then to nothing, then repeats from the same spot. A loop, a warning. A building's impression of a person depends on who you ask and how much they like sleeping. There's a pocket halfway down where the light fails for a blink every time, no matter the battery, no matter the bulb. The beam dulls, colors drain to old movie, and sound pulls a step away, as if your ears just remembered an appointment elsewhere. If you stop there, and you won't on purpose, you might feel fingers of cool air find your wrists. People describe it like standing beside a train track, as a slow freight rolls by, unseen. A moving pressure, a verdict made of weather. The obscure interpretations are a cabinet full of toys. Engineers argue for infrasound. Long concrete tubes, steady ocean pressure, wind sneaking through vents, perfect for frequencies your ears don't hear, but your bones do. Infrasound can write ghosts on your nerves, they say. It can make you feel watched, crushed, or temporarily annoyed at your own lungs for being dramatic. In those conditions, a swing of the light across contrails of steam can bloom a human-shaped shadow with the same sincerity as a memory. Then, there's the lighthouse people. In the right fog, the old light's signature scatter, or modern beacons doing their best impression, can leak through service gaps, bounce off metallic surfaces, and paint moving silhouettes where no bodies are. If your flashlight hits a shining pipe at the same time, you get a layered phantom, a double exposure of the present and the weather. My favorite odd theory comes from a corrosion tech who spent too many evenings with galvanic charts. Minute currents traveling the grounded runs of pipe create the tiniest corona discharge in very damp air, too faint to see, but enough to give the eye a ghostly edge to any contrast. The corridor, in other words, may be politely electrocuting your sense of certainty. Gentle joke number 3. If your hair stands up, it's either paranormal activity or humidity, reminding you it pays the bills around here. And yet, for all the clever physics, something here acts like it knows you are here. That's the part the equations don't soften. Rangers report the shadows stopping at junctions when people speak, almost like eavesdropping. A custodian tells of rolling a cart, hearing a second set of wheels behind him, and glancing back to see his own shadow split. One part ahead, one part peeling off down a side run as if to scout. A volunteer sorting interpretive placards felt a presence stand just behind his right shoulder for 3 full minutes, long enough for the body to downgrade fear to frustration. He finally said, "Either help or go," and a laminated map slid gently off the stack to the floor. Coincidence? The corridor refuses to be cornered by nouns. There's an unresolved mystery the island wears like a badge. The sealed door. Midway down, a steel hatch has been welded shut since the federal days. No tours go through, no modern map bothers with what's beyond. Ask 3 staffers what the door once served, and you'll get 3 proud answers: steam chase, cable run, emergency egress, each delivered with the confidence of a memory that knows it's performing. The haunting attaches to the ignorance. Knocks come from that hatch in 3s, sometimes 4s, rarely twice. When someone raps back, the reply answers too quickly to be plumbing, and too slowly to be echo. Is it a loop, a mouse with manners, a human, past tense, who still prefers the long way around? The debate keeps the door welded and the story fresh. Another little quarrel. Are these shadows inmates or staff? Maintenance folks claim the gate is a worker's purpose without hurry. Former officers say the pause at intersections is a guard's assess, then proceed. Sensitives muddy the water with a third camp. None of the above. They say the corridor amplifies what you bring. If you expect an inmate, you'll get a slouch. If you expect a guard, you'll get a square jaw made of dark. If you expect nothing, the island will generously provide something to correct your manners. You stand with your light off for a very brave count of 3. The dark arrives like it's paid to be punctual. There's a soft scritch behind you, the kind of sound that makes your shoes rehearse running. You turn the beam back on and discover only insulation shedding its patience. For a moment, you laugh quiet, because laughter sounds like it would echo down here and haunt you on the way back to the ferry. When you finally turn to leave, the corridor does the Alcatraz thing. It rearranges distance. 10 steps feel like 5, then like 15. The T-junction watches you without having eyes. As you pass the welded door, something taps from the other side. Once, twice, 3 times, and you do not, absolutely do not, return the courtesy. You are invested in the health of your future self. At the threshold, you look back with the same reflex that makes people look at the ocean after they've told it they're done for the day. Your light finds nothing but pipe, dust, and air that wishes it were outside. And yet, the impression of a figure lingers in the corner of your sight, the simple geometry of shoulder, arm, turn. You blink, and the geometry goes back to being wall. Up into the brighter dim of the cell house, you carry the corridor with you anyway. The taps, the low thing, the tall thing, the welded door's etiquette. Later, when the house is quiet and the fan hums like far-off machinery, you'll think of how shadows here have jobs, routes, and opinions about people who stop in the wrong spot. You'll sleep eventually. The corridor won't. There's always one more inspection, one more pass, one more reminder that on this island, even the spaces between places learned how to keep watch. C-Block's corridors have a sound of their own, different from A or B. The clank here feels deeper, the echoes closer to your ears, and the air has that faint tang of old metal that sits just on the edge of taste. But there's one stretch in particular known simply as the cold spot that pulls your attention even if you're trying to keep your head down and your steps quick. It runs between 2 rows of cells near the far end of C-Block. No signs mark it, no official tour guide points it out, but you know when you found it. You're walking, you're warm enough from the crowd and the California sun still clinging to your jacket. And then, you're not. The temperature doesn't just drop, it pulls the warmth out of you, as if you've stepped into a shadow thick enough to drink heat. You feel it on your cheeks, in your fingertips. Sometimes, your breath fogs even when the rest of the room stays clear. The well-known version of the story links the cold spot to an inmate death in the 1930s. A man named Dutch Weber, convicted of armed robbery and assault, was serving time here. Dutch had a quick temper and a talent for finding trouble. One day, after a heated exchange with a guard, he was pulled from the yard and returned to his cell in C Block. That night, he was found dead, strangled, though no one could agree on whether it was suicide, murder, or something else entirely. The next day, guards and inmates alike reported feeling an icy draft in the corridor outside Dutch's cell. No windows, no vents, no obvious source, just an unnatural chill that lingered long after the warden ordered the cell cleaned out. The obscure version is stranger. Some old-timers claim the cold spot isn't tied to Dutch at all, but to the prison's brief stint as a military detention facility before it became a federal penitentiary. They say a soldier-turned-prisoner was executed here for killing another inmate, and that the chill is the echo of that final moment, some sort of emotional residue etched into the air. Paranormal investigators who've measured the temperature say it can be 20 degrees colder than the surrounding area, sometimes more. The phenomenon isn't constant. It comes in waves, as if something is pacing back and forth, bringing the cold with it. The unresolved mystery is whether the chill is physical or psychological. Skeptics point to drafts from the building's aging infrastructure, claiming the bay winds sneak in through hairline cracks in the masonry. Believers counter that no such cracks have ever been found, and that the cold appears even on calm, windless days. One visitor described it perfectly. It's like walking through a ghost that hasn't forgiven you yet. Stand there long enough, and you might notice more than just the cold. A faint shuffling sound behind you. The feeling of someone brushing past your arm without touching it. The urge to glance over your shoulder, only to see the empty length of corridor staring right back. And if you keep standing there, if you really want to test yourself, count to 10 in the cold. If you make it all the way, the warmth will rush back in an instant, almost dizzying. But sometimes, just before it does, you'll hear a whisper so soft you can't tell if it came from the cell, the corridor, or somewhere far older than either. You look up and the building looks back in straight lines. Steel catwalk, chain rail, ladder fixed to a wall that means it. The cell house gun gallery runs along the upper edge, like an underline thin as a rule, strong as a verdict. In the old days, an armed officer paced up there with keys that didn't jingle and a rifle that needed no introduction. Down below, men learned to keep their voices measured because even a sigh could be mistaken for a signal in a place that specialized in misreading hope. Stand beneath it, and your neck does that slow museum tilt. You can almost hear the rhythm. 8 paces, glance, 8 paces back. Sometimes you actually do hear it. A crisp, measured step, 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 too regular to be plumbing and too patient to be a tourist who lost their group. Then, it stops always above the same corner, as though a pair of eyes you can't see has just pinned the tier with a quiet question. Anything? The well-known version of the gun gallery haunting is tidy. A ranger locking up lifts a hand to shade the glare and sees a man in khaki standing at parade rest, hat brim casting a neat shadow. The details are right. The tie knot, the squared shoulders, the way the weight sits more in the left hip than the right from thousands of practiced turns. The ranger blinks the way people blink when they're about to negotiate with their own brain. The figure leans a fraction, as if to check a line of sight, and dissolves into the lattice of the rail. Later, reviewing a photo taken a few minutes earlier, the ranger finds a faint hat-shaped absence where the air should be full. Not proof, exactly. More like the building refusing to keep a secret without at least hinting that it knows one. There's a second popular variant, traded among night staff like a recipe, the click that doesn't belong to any modern mechanism. Not the clack of a lock or the slap of a radio, this is the slick miniature syllable of a safety being tested or a bolt eased, quick and competent. It's followed sometimes by the smell of cold gun oil, a peppery metal tang that belongs to a century ago. You look up on instinct. Nothing, and yet the back of your neck has already decided it has been seen. If you're wondering whether the presence feels hostile, the living debate it. Many describe it as supervisory more than predatory, call it spectral management. A volunteer says the footsteps quicken when visitors lean over railings or stray hands brush displays. It's like being shushed with shoes, she jokes, rubbing her arms. A retired officer who returns now and then to squint at the past swears the energy softens when school groups file in. He slows down for the kids, the officer says, like he's proud the place is learning them something that isn't fear. A gentler moment surfaces now and then, a breath of warmer air above your shoulders while you read the rules board, as if someone has stopped just behind you to make sure you understand. You feel yourself straighten automatically, posture correcting to please a standard you were never briefed on. Gentle joke. Congrats, you just got inspected by a ghost. You passed because you remembered to exist quietly. Obscure interpretation number 1 comes from acoustics folks who love a challenge. They point out that the gun gallery is a perfect sounding board, long, rigid, parallel to other long, rigid things. In the right bay weather, the structure can carry and rebroadcast footsteps from elsewhere, even compressing them into neat beats. Throw in infrasound crawling the length of the house like a polite snake, and you've got a recipe for feeling watched by math. Per this view, the click you hear might be two distant noises colliding at a corner and shaking hands. Obscure interpretation number 2 is more architectural memory than physics. Some preservationists talk about use prints not just hand oils, darkening rails, but routine pressed into a material's behavior. The gallery, they say, has done one job for so long that it offers that job back at night, replaying duty the way a worn stair offers a particular footfall. The figure, the steps, the pause at the corner, not a person, but the task itself, wearing the shape of whoever did it best. Then, there's the unresolved mystery the island refuses to label, the spent casing. A handful of times over the last decades, staff have found a single brass cartridge on the floor below the gallery before opening hours. Not where visitors could have planted one easily, not where reenactors would be careless. The calibers reported don't always match, stories are magpies for detail. But the ritual is consistent. The casing appears clean, warm to the touch even when the morning is cold, with that faint oil smell that makes memory sit up. It's bagged, tagged, discussed, then quietly disappears into a desk that eats oddities. Ask about it, and you'll get the confident shrug of a ranger who has decided not to be in charge of everything. Skeptics will tell you it's a prank. Believers will tell you the gallery still trains. The island will tell you nothing and keep the casing for itself next time. You shift to get a better look and catch movement at the far turn-only shadow. You tell yourself, a darker tangle where light hates to behave. But the shape resolves into geometry you recognize. A hat brim, a shoulder line, the outline of a man turning into the corner for a view down a block. He pauses as if counting something that belongs to him, and then slides out of sight the way a thought leaves the room and takes the reason you walked into it. Below, the cell doors wear their old anger like a shine. Above, the rail hums faintly when the wind tests the panes. A group passes, voices low without being told to be, and the gallery answers with a soft tick-tick like a fingernail on metal. If you were the sort to wave, you might wave. Gentle joke, please don't salute. If anything salutes back, you will set a personal best for the 100-meter nope. Sometimes the gallery speaks in photographs instead of sound. Tourists review shots in the ferry line and find a smear of gray where a body ought to be, crisp-edged and torso tall. In one image that does the rounds in ranger break rooms, the reflection in the polished rail shows a tie knot and nothing above it, as if the light remembered the uniform but not the face. Another shows a shadow bending where the catwalk no longer bends. The restoration removed a span years ago, but the darkness still turns there out of habit, stepping onto air that only existed in 1941. How do you live with a place that remembers when you don't? You make little rules. You don't point at the gallery when it's pacing. You don't whistle a tune-up at nobody. You do not under any circumstances say clear like you're dismissing a room. Alcatraz enjoys people who think they outrank history. It responds with pop quizzes. Even among staff, one argument never settles. Who is he? Some insist he's a composite every officer who earned the gait and the patience, layered into one long duty. Others name a specific man, usually one who died years after the prison closed, because a disciplined life tries on eternity the way a well-made suit tries on a body, perfectly. A third camp sidesteps identity and talks motive. He's not a who, but a what. the job itself, looping to keep chaos honest. Stand there long enough, and the gallery will stage a small experiment with your nerves. The steps resume faint, even reassuring if you let them be, and then they stop directly above you. A draft comes down like a hand-smoothing cowlicks. You become very interested in the scuff on your shoe. For a breath, you are a line in an old ledger accounted for, evaluated, released. When the pacing starts again, you feel oddly grateful. Something old has decided you are not today's problem. You exhale and realize you've been holding the same breath as the building. The gallery recedes to steel. The hat brim evaporates to shadow. The click is only a memory pretending to be a sound. Still, as you walk away, you keep your steps neat, your hands visible, your curiosity on a leash. Not out of fear, out of respect for a job that refuses to retire. At the end of the tier, you glance back. The rail gleams. The lattice is empty. And yet, for one last heartbeat, the corner holds the shape of someone pausing to look down at you. You nod because manners cost nothing on an island that charges interest. The dining hall at Alcatraz looks ordinary at first. Long rows of tables, bolted benches, a servery that's all angles and hard edges. But if you stand still long enough, the room starts to remember for you. That clang in the corner isn't a random noise. It's a tray, finding out about gravity the hard way. The scuff on the floor is a map of 1,000 shuffles. The light from the high windows falls in strips like rules you can't step outside of. Guards called this the most dangerous room in the prison. Not the cell house, not the yard. Here, too many bodies in one place. Too many utensils that could stop being utensils. Above your head, recessed in the ceiling, are steel ports that once held gas canisters, last resort insurance against a riot. You look up, and suddenly the hall feels like a lung that prefers to breathe alone. You feel it in your shoulders, a pressure that has nothing to do with weather. Even the gulls outside keep their commentary brief. The well-known version of the haunting here is sound first, picture second. When the room is empty between tours, staff hear the roll, a metal tray skittering across tabletop, then dropping to concrete with a ringing finality. Sometimes it's followed by the soft, embarrassed murmur that people make when the universe reminds them of gravity. The room holds the pause just long enough for you to decide whether you imagined it. Another classic, the smell of coffee. Not subtle, not maybe someone's thermos. A hot, bitter wave that seems to arrive on its own timetable, curling off invisible pots. Coffee was a luxury on the rock. The scent has the confidence of memory that knows it was wanted. You breathe in, you smile without meaning to, and then the room takes it back. There's also the count cough, a single, purposeful ahem from somewhere behind you. The kind a guard used to clear his throat before calling the room to attention. Gentle joke to keep your pulse friendly. Congratulations, you just got throat cleared by a ghost. Please pretend you were about to behave anyway. People talk about a figure by the servery doors, a broad-shouldered shadow that stands with his hands behind his back, like trouble is punctual, and he appreciates that. When you turn to check, the doorway is empty, but the posture he left behind lingers in the air like a line on a chalkboard that didn't quite erase. A quieter, stranger report belongs to the utensils. In the 1940s, knives were chained to the tables. Today, display cases show the old control's cutlery counts written and rewritten. Rangers swear that now and then, the count card on a case fogs lightly, as if someone breathed on the glass to check the numbers, and a print appears at the edge. Not clear enough to match, too clear to ignore. Obscure interpretation number 1 comes from acoustics. This room is a box that likes to play fetch with sound. A clank in the kitchen can take a tour around the ceiling and drop behind you with impeccable comic timing. Thermal expansion in the tables pops like a snapped spoon. Add bay wind, threading the vents, and you've got a percussion section tuned to unease. The rolling tray phenomenon, by this reading, is two noises, pipe ping and bench creak arriving together like a pratfall. The coffee smell, olfactory recall, your brain obligingly pouring scent to match the picture. Obscure interpretation number 2 is psychogenic, but not in the boring way. Group anxiety leaves fingerprints, the theory goes. Decades of mealtimes spent on the edge of violence saturate a room like steam. Put modern bodies under the same roof, drop their voices to a whisper with a few well-told stories, and the hall performs what it remembers. A cough, a tray, a smell. Not fakery, a kind of atmospheric muscle memory. Still, the dining hall has its sharper edges. One former officer returned as a visitor years after retirement and refused to sit on a bench for a photograph. He said he felt knees press against the back of his calves, as if an invisible line had formed and preferred him not to break it. "I could hear the men," he said, looking at the empty room. "Not words, just the shape of waiting." A volunteer tells of stacking interpretive signs at closing, when the overhead lights dimmed on their own one bank, then another until the hall settled into the gray of a foggy noon. He stood very still and heard the hiss that lives only in memory, tear gas ports blooming overhead, except nothing dropped. No canister, no metallic rattle. The hiss faded, and the lights returned in the reverse order, polite as a hand unshaking yours. There's a local variant folded into Ranger lore, call it the late place. Old-timers say that after the first bell, the hall has a habit of making an extra space at the end of a bench. Nobody sees it happen. You just look and there's room where there wasn't room. Some swear that's when the rolling tray begins, end of the row to center aisle, as if someone is catching up and not thrilled about the floor's opinion. Skeptics nod and point at uneven tables. Believers nod and point at the empty space that sits with too much intention. Another variant, the knife tick. A soft, regular tap under a table, like metal against chain. Guards used to listen for that sound. It meant someone was getting ideas one link at a time. Today, the tick surfaces when the hall is empty, and everyone nearby suddenly decides to count to 10 out loud because silence has lost the vote. Unresolved mysteries? The dining hall is rich in them. The first is the menu board day. Once in a while, staff open up to find the chalkboard-lettered menu items written in a hand no one claims. Not detailed, just suggestive. Stew, coffee, bread. The handwriting differs blocky one month, slanted the next. Cameras have never caught a culprit. The board is sometimes dusty, sometimes freshly wiped with water that dried in lines like careful erasures. Practical explanations exist. Pranks, nighttime renters, an overachieving ranger with a sense of theater. But the frequency makes practical feel like a guest here, not the landlord. The second unresolved thread is a story from the week after the 1946 Battle of Alcatraz. An inmate was allegedly marched into the hall alone to eat under guard, an unusual concession after the violence. 2 officers counted him in, 1 counted him out. The numbers didn't reconcile on paper until later, when a clerk changed a digit in pencil. Archivists argue about the entry. Copies disagree with copies. What the legend preserves is the feeling that for a breath, a man sat where no one was supposed to sit and left without touching the floor. A final debate. Did the gas ports ever deploy? Officially, no recorded use. Unofficially, a retired guard claimed a test was run once at dawn with water vapor, the room filled with a white bloom that made men on duty cough for a week. Every now and then, a low mist hugs the ceiling in photographs taken at odd hours. Fog sneaks in here, the way stories sneak into ledgers, efficiently. 3 gentle jokes to set your table manners. First, if you hear the tray roll, resist the urge to say 5-second rule to a room that invented the zero tolerance policy. The ghosts will judge your hygiene and your timing. Second, if the coffee smell hits and you reach for a cup that isn't there, that is not a haunting, that is hope, please hydrate anyway. Third, if you feel the urge to seat yourself by rank or row, congratulations, the room is training you. Go with it, you'll walk out straighter. Stand at the center aisle and listen. There are 2 benches over the small scrape of metal, the brush of fabric, the soft, collective intake of breath that happens right before a room decides if calm is going to win. The hall waits for you to move. When you don't, it makes the decision for you. The pressure eases, the sound drains, the smell thins to salt and soap left in stone. You look up at the ports one more time and think about a ceiling that once promised consequences. You look down at the floor and see scuffs that refuse to fade. You look at the benches and imagine 1,000 backs deciding, at once, to sit still. As you step into the corridor, something small rings behind you. A quick, bright ting that could be a fork, a chain, a coin flicked in boredom. You don't turn around. You've learned the dining hall's lesson. Sometimes the safest thing in a dangerous room is to keep walking like you were always meant to. The story of an escape gone wrong isn't rare on Alcatraz. This was, after all, a place designed to make gone nearly impossible. But there's one failed attempt the island seems to have kept, like a pressed leaf, bringing it out every so often to rattle the air in cell house corridors. It's not the famous 1962 escape of the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris that one has its own share of mysteries. This is an earlier, less celebrated, but far more unsettling event. The attempted break of 1941, when two inmates tried their luck against steel, tide, and fate, and found something else waiting. The well-known version begins with two names, Rufus McCain and Harold Brest. They were mid-tier criminals by Alcatraz standards, armed robbery, repeated attempts to outwit the law, a stubborn dislike for cages. On a windy April night, they made their move, slipping out of the cell house through a kitchen window and heading toward the water with makeshift flotation gear. They didn't get far. Guards spotted them on the rocky shoreline, where they claimed they'd been just looking for fish, a creative but unconvincing alibi at 2 a.m. Brest was hauled back without incident. McCain was shot in the leg when he tried to run. Both were returned to their cells, their escape dream dead in the water. That's the official ending. The hauntings version keeps going. In the months following, guards patrolling the same shoreline at night began to report movement. Not the usual restless gulls or sea lions, but the hunched silhouette of a man standing knee-deep in the surf. He never moved toward them, never called out, just stood there, rocking slightly with the waves, as if deciding which way the tide would take him. When the searchlight hit, the figure was gone, but the water where he'd been kept rippling for a long time after. Some say it's McCain, stuck in the moment when he realized the island wasn't letting him go. Others argue it's a kind of placeholder ghost, a spirit the island keeps on reserve for all those who failed. Either way, it's rarely seen without the sound. A sudden splash, like someone dropping into the bay, followed by a silence thick enough to make your ears ring. The obscure variant is darker. According to one old-timer's tale, McCain and Brest weren't the only ones on that shoreline. Another prisoner, a man no roster records, was with them, guiding them to a hidden route. Some say he was a former fisherman who knew the currents. Others that he was a ghost trustee, allowed to roam at night for reasons no one understood. He vanished mid-run, and the surviving inmates swore they heard him calling from the water afterward, promising safe passage. Guards wrote it off as panic. But decades later, two separate tourists claimed they heard a man's voice from the rocks, repeating in a calm, confident tone, "This way, this way." The unresolved mystery is a torn length of prison-issue denim that washes up on the rocks once every few years. It's always frayed, as if it's been in the water a long time, but never slimy or sea-worn. Rangers bag it, store it, and somehow it always disappears before the next official inventory. Skeptics think it's litter from film shoots. Believers think the island spits it up as a reminder. No one escapes without leaving something behind. If you walk that shoreline now, especially in the half-light of early morning, you might hear the wet slap of steps following you just out of view. It's not gulls, they're farther out. It's not the tide, it's coming from the wrong direction. Sometimes you'll feel a spray of cold water on your legs, as though someone just ran past you toward the bay. And if you make the mistake of looking too closely at the water's edge, you might see it. A pair of shoulders barely breaking the surface, bobbing with the rhythm of someone too tired to swim, too stubborn to sink. No matter how fast you get the spotlight or your phone camera, the surface will be empty again, except for the sound of a single splash echoing back from the fog. Gentle joke for your nerves. If a stranger offers you a ride across the bay and doesn't have a boat, that's your cue to decline politely. You leave the shoreline with the wind pushing at your back, like it's trying to hurry you inside. But even after the cell house door shuts, you swear you can hear water dripping somewhere nearby, steady, insistent, and just irregular enough to sound like footsteps. The utility corridors of Alcatraz are the kind of place even ghosts might second guess. They're narrow, low-lit, and lined with pipes that sweat condensation like they've been nervous for decades. Most visitors never see them. These passages were built for maintenance, not tours, but every so often, a ranger with a certain level of clearance leads a special group down here. If you're lucky, or unlucky depending on your point of view, you'll feel it before you see it. It's that other darkness, not the absence of light, but the presence of shadow. like something is standing just close enough to block more than its share of the dim bulbs overhead. The well-known version of the haunting begins with the guards. Even back when the prison was running, officers avoided being in the utility corridors alone. Reports would come in of shapes pacing, just ahead of the work light, always out of reach, always moving toward the next bend. More than one electrician swore they'd heard breathing slow, heavy, and wet, coming from a stretch of pipe where no person could fit. Some guards described the shadows as human-sized but wrong in proportion, too long in the arms or too narrow in the head, as if whoever they were had been stretched to fit the walls. The figures never touched anyone, but one officer said the way they stopped moving when you stopped, and started again when you did, made him feel like a mouse being paced by something that didn't need a trap. An obscure variant is known as the handprint story. A maintenance worker in the 50s claimed that, while checking for leaks, he saw a dark handprint appear on the concrete wall ahead of him, clearer and darker than a water stain, almost like soot. When he turned to fetch a tool, the print was gone. Others have told similar stories since the prison became a tourist site, except now the prints are sometimes described as longer than a man's, and with too many joints in the fingers. Another, even stranger version talks about the smell. Most of the time, these corridors smell like rust, dust, and the faint tang of the bay. But on rare occasions, the air fills with a sharp, metallic scent, like hot iron cooling or fresh blood. It's brief, gone before anyone can locate the source, but it leaves people unsettled for hours afterward. The unresolved mystery centers on a 1,940 escape attempt that was never officially documented. Rumor has it 2 inmates used the utility corridors to try to reach the lower service docks. According to the legend, they made it as far as the 3rd bend before turning back in a panic, claiming something had been following them. No record of their punishment exists, and both men refuse to explain further. Skeptics chalk it up to fear of getting lost in the maze. Believers point out that one of the men was later transferred off the island abruptly and without reason. If you ever get to walk these halls, pay attention to the way sound works here. Your own footsteps will echo in front of you, behind you, and above you, like the walls are deciding which way you'll hear them next. Sometimes you'll swear there's a second set matching yours, a fraction of a beat late, as though something is testing your rhythm. And if you do see a shadow in here, long arms, narrow head, do yourself a kindness. Keep walking, steady pace, no sudden stops. Because in the utility corridors, it's not the light you should be watching. It's the dark, and the way it seems to know exactly where you'll turn next. Gentle joke for the brave. If a shadow down here waves at you, it's either the friendliest ghost on the island, or it's just practicing. You finally emerge back into the cell house proper, the hum of visitors above grounding you again. But even as you climb the narrow stairs, you keep glancing over your shoulder, because in those tight passages, you're never really sure whether you left the shadow behind, or if it left you. The hospital wing doesn't announce itself with grandeur. It sidles up behind the cell house like an afterthought. Narrow halls, frosted windows, tile that once cared about being white. The air changes at the threshold thinner somehow, but sweetened by a smell that your brain labels before you want it to. Antiseptic. Even after all these years, the wing still wears the perfume of endings and almosts. You step in, and the acoustics go soft. Sounds don't echo here the way they do in the blocks. They pad along beside you like a nurse in rubber soles, choosing not to make a fuss. Somewhere, a faint metallic rattle rolls 3 feet and stops. A gurney, you think, and then tell yourself not to think that. The well-known version of the hospital haunting starts at the ward doors just off the main corridor. Visitors pause, feel the temperature slip, and then hear it. The slow squeak of a wheel in need of oil, coming toward the jam and stopping as if lined up perfectly with your feet. If you look down at the threshold, you'll see the grooves worn into the tile where carts once passed. People swear the grooves deepen when you look away. There's a figure too, repeated in enough accounts to make it boring only if you've never met him. A man in a pale patient gown, shoulder breadth of someone who used to be bigger than this room allows, hair clipped short, head turned toward the windows. He stands by the bed with the stiff posture of someone pretending the needles don't care. Noticeable detail, bandages at both wrists. When you try to meet his face, the light from the window burns out his features and leaves only a silhouette. He doesn't move. He just keeps watch over where his body used to be. Guards in the 1940s had their own title for a presence up here, the Night Doctor. Reports had him walking his rounds long after the wing was empty. Tall, long coat, hands folded behind, footsteps perfectly spaced. You'd hear him before lights, you'd hear him after taps, and if you were foolish enough to fall asleep on a chair during midnight duty, you'd wake to the gentle pressure of 2 fingers at your wrist, counting the proof that you still belong to the living. Gentle joke 1, yes, even your pulse gets audited on Alcatraz. The wing saw everything a prison sees. Stitches, fevers, beatings that learned a new word for consequences, lungs that gave up under bay air, and minds that came apart quietly because the island has patience. Somewhere behind a glass-fronted cabinet sits the dental chair, its light frozen mid-interrogation. More than one visitor has climbed the step to peek and felt the unmistakable hum of a machine that has neither power nor mercy. They back away with their hands over their mouths, smiling at the ridiculousness of fear and also not removing their hands because fear loves sincerity. Nurses appear in the telling as white blurs at the periphery caps. Aprons, a flash of stocking. Sometimes the details resolve. Dark hair tucked tight, sensible shoes, a face so tired it's nearly kind. Other times, the uniform is perfect and the face is nothing at all, a smooth absence like frost on a mirror. She turns at the end of the hall and the frost takes the rest of her too. There's a quieter haunt, easy to miss unless you've needed it, the call light. Antique panels still hang outside a few doors, boxes with little glass flags that once flipped when a patient pressed a button by the bed. Staff swear that once or twice a month, a flag snaps up with a crispness that ignores the decades. No electricity, no wiring, no clever magnet, just the neat little semaphore of need. You walk into the room and find the bed made with history and dust. The flag drops back down without comment. Later, on your ferry, you'll touch your forearm and find the faint dent where the blood pressure cuff should have been. Obscure interpretations queue up like interns. One camp blames anesthesia, echoes, not literally, but chemically. Ether, chloroform, cleaning agents, molecules that dug into grout and wood, burrowed into paint. On humid days, a phantom note can rise off old surfaces and tip the nose toward memory. Smell is a hard line to the limbic system. Catch the right trace, and your brain will kindly supply a visual you did not order. Another camp loves electrical ghosts. This wing once dripped with wiring, call bells, compressors for cold storage, X-ray gear. Even dead, the network of copper and iron makes a peculiar antenna. Fog and sea air do their conductive work, and you get tiny, localized charges, the sort that can nudge a lightweight flag, tickle the hair on your wrist, or carry a 2-syllable whisper from one vent to another. Don't move. One ranger recorded outside the surgery room, a whisper so clear it made him laugh first and sit down second. A third, stranger theory is the time slip people. They argue hospitals hoard hours differently. Routine piles on routine until the clock has more grooves than numbers. Under pressure, weather fronts, anniversaries, a tour group holding its breath together, the grooves align. For a minute or an hour, the ward plays 1,939 to an audience that brought 2,025 shoes. Hence the gurney squeak. Hence the soft cough from a bed that doesn't exist anymore. Unresolved mysteries keep the wing humming. The first is the bell at 3. Once or twice a season, just before 3. 0 a.m. Staff on overnight events hear a single desk bell. One of those tidy, domed ones you'd slap for a tension ring from the nurse's station. There is no bell. There is no desk. There is, however, a clipboard that slides 6 inches toward the edge, all on its own, and stops as if a hand decided against finishing the thought. The second is the locked cabinet. A glass front medicine cabinet in a treatment room gets inventoried for exhibit rotation. Bottles, labels, a folded gauze packet that looks like it wants a story. The door is locked, the key in a desk 30 yards away. Twice in 5 years, the inventory sheet shows one item out of order, the next morning moved from the second shelf to the first. Security footage shows nothing. The cabinet glass shows a smear, like a sleeve. A debate that refuses to shut itself. Did the Birdman Robert Stroud leave his mark up here? He spent years in the hospital tier, later in his sentence. Some swear the faint plink-plink heard in the small hours is a water dish, that the softly muttered counting 1, 2, 3 belongs to a man who tried to build a world from repetition. Archivists bristle. The birds were from Leavenworth, not the rock. The wing clears its throat and declines to testify. You linger by an open doorway, and the room fills with the kind of quiet that pulls on your earlobes. There's a bed, there's a window, there's the shadow of a stand where an IV would be if the plastic age had arrived sooner. You step closer, and your shadow gets company another outline, leaning over the bed from the opposite side. For one very practical second, you admire the lighting design of a room that invents extra silhouettes. Then the second ends, and the second shadow straightens without you moving. A pulse oximeter alarm never installed here beeps twice in your imagination because your imagination is nothing if not helpful. Gentle joke 2. If you hear code blue, that's your fight or flight paging itself. Please do not attempt chest compressions on an exhibit. Footsteps approach along the corridor. Heel then soul, heel then soul. That confident medical walk that says we're under control even if we aren't. They stop at your doorway. You feel watched the way a thermometer feels consulted. A low voice, quiet, professional, impatient at the limits of distance, says something you can't quite catch. It sounds like, hold. It could be cold. It could be your name if you let it. The steps move on. You exhale for the first time in a while, and a fog of breath you didn't plan appears in front of your face. You'd blame the bay if the rest of the corridor weren't warm. 3 gentle observations to tuck into your pocket before we roll you out. First, if your smartwatch vibrates with a heart rate warning up here, that's not paranormal, that's cardio feedback, judging your life choices. Second, if you smell ether, don't announce it. The hospital wing is competitive and will start showing off. Third, if a call light flag pops, do what every good visitor does, say coming politely, and let the room be proud of you. On your way out, a wheel squeaks once, exactly behind your heel. You don't turn. You've learned the island's manners. The threshold breathes past your ankles like air, leaving a curtain when a window opens. Back in the cell house, noise returns at full volume. Tour shoes, distant gulls, a ranger's radio checking in. But a clean, clinical quiet sticks to you like the crisp sheet of a made bed. Tonight, when your own house settles and the fan hums its patient line, you'll hear a tiny bell ring in your head and feel a phantom pulse taken by fingers that aren't yours. The hospital wing taught you the kindest version of the island's truth. Sometimes, the thing that lingers isn't a threat. It's the insistence that someone is still on rounds. The administration building sits like the brain of Alcatraz, a blocky, weathered head at the top of the island, staring out over the water as if daring the fog to try something clever. Once, this was where the warden worked, where clerks shuffled papers, where guards clocked in and filed reports. Today, most visitors pass through without thinking much of it, but the few who linger say this place still thinks, still keeps accounts, and still keeps watch. The first thing you notice here is the echo. Not the wild, metallic kind you get in the cell blocks. This echo is tighter, sharper, almost intelligent. A cough bounces back with just enough delay to make you believe someone else coughed in reply. Your own steps return in double time, one set right after the other. You tell yourself it's acoustics, because what else would it be? The well-known version of the administration building haunting is the footsteps. They're always described as crisp, purposeful, and heavier than any sneaker or loafer worn by a tourist. Former guards have said the sound is identical to the old leather-soled uniform shoes worn by officers in the 40s and 50s. You'll hear them pacing from one end of the hall to the other, stopping abruptly like someone has reached a desk, bent over paperwork, and frozen mid-thought because you walked in. Tour guides say the pattern's always the same. The steps come from behind you, pass just close enough for you to feel the floorboards flex, then continue ahead until they vanish around a corner. If you follow quickly, the hallway is empty. The air, however, feels newly disturbed, as though a door has just closed. An obscure variant comes from the warden's office itself. In the early years after the prison closed, staff using the building as a storage space claimed to see a man in a dark suit sitting at the warden's desk, head bent over a file. They'd blink, and he'd be gone, but the desk calendar would be flipped to a date decades past, usually sometime in the late 1930s. No one could explain how the stiff, yellowed pages kept moving when no one had touched them. Others report a faint smell in the office pipe tobacco, with a hint of bay air that matches the preferences of Warden James A. Johnston. Johnston was known for his strict discipline and iron control over the prison, but also for walking the island at night, checking locks, and speaking to inmates personally. Some believe his ghost lingers in the administration building to keep tabs on both the living and the dead. Then there's the unresolved mystery of the typewriter keys. One of the old Remington typewriters from the office, long since inoperable, occasionally clicks on its own. A single key will depress and rise again, producing no ink but leaving the unmistakable sound in the room. Witnesses say it's always just one letter, and always the same: R. Nobody knows why. Some joke it stands for rock, others for return. A few point out that R was the first letter in report, a word that would have been typed here thousands of times. If you visit on a windy day, you might hear the flagpole rope outside clanging against the metal, a harmless, ordinary sound. But sometimes, that clang will sync up with footsteps inside, as if the building itself is keeping time for its unseen occupants. The sync will hold for several beats, then stop abruptly, and the air will feel like it's holding its breath. One ranger told a story of locking up the building at dusk. He'd just shut the main door when a voice behind him said, clear as anything, leave the light. He turned, and the hall was empty, but the light at the far end, which he'd already switched off, was burning again. He left it on. He doesn't know why. Gentle joke to ease the shiver. If a phantom here asks you to clock in, at least ask if it's overtime. As you step back outside, the sound of the bay rushes in, rough and restless. But behind you, through the glass doors, you swear you still hear the steady, deliberate tread of leather soles pacing a hall that refuses to stay empty. The steps fade only after you've walked halfway down the hill, as if the unseen watchman needed to make absolutely sure you were leaving. The lighthouse stands a little apart from everything else on Alcatraz, like a tall, stern relative who watches family arguments without joining in. In daylight, it looks almost gentle, chalk white against a sky that can't quite decide on blue. But in fog, it becomes an eye with no eyelid, the one thing that doesn't blink when the island would prefer to. You angle up the hill, and the wind stiffens, salted and insistent. The ground is scabbed with old concrete. Gulls tack and scold, then vanish into a brightness that isn't light so much as diluted distance. When the horn moans low, patient, larger than the island, you feel it in your ribs. That's when you realize, out here, warnings are a language, and the lighthouse has always been fluent. They say a keeper still climbs where there's nothing left to climb. The well-known version of the story is a lantern first, a man second. Near dusk, in a fog thick enough to feel like you're walking through advice, a yellow glow moves along the path below the tower, steady, human height, swaying with a rhythm you don't get from flashlights or phones. It pauses at corners the way a shoulder pauses when carrying a weight. Then it turns, and for a breath, you see the shape behind it. A coat, a cap with a short brim, the set of a jaw that has long experience with weather. If you call out, the glow dips once, like the practiced nod of a man, acknowledging your existence without accepting your nonsense, and slides away. Rangers closing the hill have watched it settle against the base of the tower, where an old door used to be, and vanish into mortar that hasn't opened in generations. The beam above you, automated for decades now, sweeps the fog like a metronome that never retired. For a second, it brightens the path at your feet as if in agreement. Older keepers had names here, of course men who rode out storms and slept odd hours, whose logbooks smelled like salt and pencil. The legend rarely picks one. It prefers the keeper, a job wearing a shape. You don't have to be anyone to be responsible. There's a variant sailors trade at the marina, over coffee that can varnish a hull. They say on certain nights, anniversaries you can't predict until they're on you. The lighthouse gives a double flash it hasn't given in a century, an old signal meant for ships running too close to teeth. The light sequence doesn't match modern charts. The foghorn answers with a long, low note that sounds offended on behalf of the past. Out in the chop, the bay obliges with a phantom bell buoy, no longer anchored anywhere near here. It tolls twice. If you're close enough, the water around your boat shivers as if a larger shape just went under. A ranger will tell you automation killed the romance of lighthouse work. Another will tell you automation made the romance honest. Whatever keeps ships off the rocks has manners. If the keeper lingers, it's not because the tech needs him. It's because the island might. You step into a shallow lee at the base, and the wind drops from shouted advice to a serious whisper. The tower's door is sealed, museum closed, bureaucracy closed, definitely not your door closed. Still, your fingers itch the way fingers do around handles they will not touch. You let them be polite and keep them to yourself. That's when the knocking begins, not the slap of rope against pole or the trumpeting argument of a gull. 3 firm raps from inside the door, slow as a teacher with time. A pause, then 2 more, closer together. Locals call that the weather knock, the keeper's shorthand for worsening conditions. It has a reputation for preceding quick changes. A bank of fog rolling over sun like a blanket over a candle. Wind shifting as if the bay decided you've had enough of one direction. More than one group has heard the knock, laughed the laugh. People laugh when they are busy being rational, and found the trail back down, swallowed by milk in minutes. Another knock lives in stories from night staff. A single, sharp strike at the metal ring where the light's maintenance ladder used to bolt. There is no ladder now. The strike still rings like a tuning fork in your teeth. Gentle joke to ease that jaw. If the island is tuning you, at least you're finally in key. Obscure interpretation time. Because Alcatraz is rich in people with theories and an affection for adjectives. The first camp delivers Fata Morgana with academic confidence. Temperature inversions over cold water can stack mirages into layered images. Lights float, elongate, and drift where they shouldn't. A passing boat's lamp pulls the trick. The hill obliges with a stage. You supply the keeper. A second camp prefers piezoelectric fog. Tiny charges build as mist scrapes over rough stone. Under the right conditions, micro-discharges may nudge nerves and make your eyes insist that a glow just moved. Add the persistent bass note of the horn, infrasound that names your bones, and your pattern-hungry brain manufactures a man to carry the light because light prefers to be carried by stories. A third camp, fewer members, better anecdotes, says the keeper is a function, not a person. Warnings are the oldest magic, they argue. When a place spends a century telling others how not to die, that intention curdles into presence. The lantern is a verb. The knock is a verb. The figure is grammar. You can pick a camp and feel very clever, right up until the wind changes and the tower tells you to go home. There's an unresolved mystery that won't fit in a brochure. The page in the keeper's log that shouldn't be there. Staff cataloging a display copy claimed they turned to an entry half written in a dry, forceful hand date, smudged by a thumbprint. Weather noted, visibility listed as poor to nil. The last line reads, light tending, and stops, as if the writer stood, pen poised. The page smelled briefly, sharply, of whale oil, though no such lamp has lived here in a lifetime. The curatorial note says, copyist's error, but the page has been checked 5 times, and every time the last line ends in the same broken dash. Another unresolved thread is the third beam. Visitors sometimes report a narrow spear of light cutting low across the parade ground at waist height, white as bone. There are only 2 windows in the lantern room. There is no mechanism for a belt-high slice. The beam appears, traces the concrete like a finger, finding its way in the dark, and disappears as if someone closed a hand around it. Debate ranges from reflections off equipment to prankster flashlights to the keeper testing a signal that isn't taught anymore. No one catches it twice on the same camera. And then the debate that enjoys its own fog. Which keeper is it? Archivists nominate names, photographs in sepia, that show men with the kind of eyes fog respects. Old ferry captains swear it's the one who died ashore after years on the island habit-outliving body. Others insist it's earlier, a man who rode out the Great Quake and made notes in the margin when the tower complained. The island declines to furnish a headstone for the argument. You stand with your back to the door, and the bay breathes on your face. The horn gives you another line to memorize. Far off, San Francisco throws lights at the fog in the losing game cities like to play. Above, the modern lamp turns its patient circle without hurry. At the edge of your sight, a softer glow, lantern yellow, moves once along the fence line, then fades as if someone cupped a palm around it. 3 more knocks come from the wood behind your shoulder. The pattern is different this time. 2 quick, 1 long. You don't know the code, but your feet do. They pick the right idea and start down the hill before your brain finishes its vote. Halfway to the parade ground, you look back. The tower is a pale finger drawing a circle on sky. Between you and it, the fog thickens until the path you just walked becomes rumor. For a moment, you imagine the keeper standing where you stood. Lantern at chest height, satisfied, you understood. Gentle joke for the brave. If a ghost ever offers you a weather report, take it. you can always leave a bad review when you're safely on the ferry. Back near the cell house, the island regains its everyday noises, radios, shoes, a guide calling 5 minutes. Still, the warning follows like a tune you can't shake. Tonight, when your fan hums and the house light clicks in the hall, you'll hear 3 knocks in the order your heart remembers and feel a small, salt-cool draft cross your ankles. No danger, just a reminder. The job continues whether or not you're looking. Some places haunt because they're sad. The lighthouse haunts because it's responsible. If the cell blocks were the bones of Alcatraz, the mess hall was its stomach rumbling, grumbling, sometimes disagreeing with what it had to swallow. The space still feels wide and watchful, with its high windows and rows of heavy tables bolted to the floor. Even stripped of the rattle of trays and the dull roar of hundreds of men eating at once, the air here hums with leftover energy, like the vibration in the skin of a drum after the last strike. They called it the most dangerous room in the prison, not because of ghosts, but because of knives. With that many utensils in one place, a mealtime could turn into a weapon store in under a minute. Guards sat in a cage high above, scanning for trouble while the clank of metal on metal became part of the daily rhythm. The well-known haunting here is the rolling tray. On quiet days, when the tourist groups have moved on and the building has settled into its late afternoon stillness, a sound cuts through. A single food tray sliding along the stainless steel counter. It starts slow, then picks up speed, ending with a sharp metallic clang like it's hit the end of the line. Visitors turn toward the noise, expecting to see a guide giving a demonstration, but there's never anyone there. The counter is bare. If you check the floor, you'll find no tray, just a faint smear of moisture, as though something cold and heavy had been there seconds ago. Staff members claim the sound can happen multiple times in a single day, usually when the fog is thick enough to press against the windows. Some say it's the echo of an old riot, when inmates flipped their trays as a signal to start throwing anything they could grab. Others believe it's just routine, a ghost kitchen worker going through the motions, serving up a meal to people who haven't been alive for decades. The obscure version is stranger. A few night shift security personnel have reported hearing the sound not just once, but in sequence as if an entire lunch line is being served in the dark. They swear they can hear the weight of food hitting the trays, the scrape of a ladle against a pot, and the faint, low murmur of voices lining up. One even claims he heard a chuckle, sharp and fast, right before the last tray clattered. There's also an odd detail from a former ranger. Sometimes the sound is followed by the smell of coffee, strong and bitter, but the mess hall coffee pot has been dry for half a century. The unresolved mystery ties back to a kitchen worker named Clarence "Red" Hayes. Red wasn't serving a life sentence, but he was known for his temper and his loyalty to the few friends he had. One day in the 1940s, an argument broke out in the serving line. Red slammed a tray down so hard it bent, then walked off shift without permission. That night, an inmate from the same table was found dead in the yard. No one could link the two events, but Red was transferred to another prison within a week. Some visitors say the rolling tray sound comes from Red's shift, the exact tray slam that marked the beginning of a grudge. Others argue it's just a loop of the most ordinary act in prison life, the small metal music of mealtime, replaying because the room doesn't know it's empty. Sit here long enough, and you'll notice the acoustics. Every step you take sends sound skittering across the floor like a flat stone on water. Your own breathing seems louder than it should. The big clock on the wall frozen forever at 6:45 becomes the only visual anchor in a space that otherwise feels like it's waiting for something to happen. And if you ever hear that rolling tray, resist the urge to walk toward it. Stand still, listen, and count. Some say if you get to 13 clatters before it stops, you'll hear a chair scrape against the floor behind you, though when you turn, all the chairs will be exactly where they've always been. Gentle joke to lighten the room. If a ghost offers you prison food, it's okay to politely decline, especially if it smells like coffee. Trust me, you're not missing much. When you finally step back into the corridor, the quiet seems heavier than before. The mess hall stays behind you, its silence stretched over the memory of metal on metal, like a dish towel over something you don't need to see again. But you can't shake the feeling that somewhere in there, a meal is still being served and the line is just getting started. The yard is one of the few open spaces on Alcatraz, a patch of weathered concrete where inmates once stretched their legs, kicked a ball around, or simply stood under the sun and pretended they weren't walled in by the sea. Standing here now, you feel the openness at first, the relief of a sky uncluttered by bars. But that relief fades quickly when you realize how the wind moves in this place. It circles, it tests, it tugs at your collar like a stranger trying to get your attention. From up on the guard towers, this space would have been a chessboard, with live pieces every move watched, every gesture judged. For the men below, it was the only place to taste a little freedom, which meant every smile, every casual lean against the wall, was a small act of rebellion. The well-known haunting is the phantom game. Visitors and rangers alike have described hearing the distinct sound of a basketball dribbling on concrete, thump, thump, thump echoing faintly, even when the yard is completely empty. Sometimes it's just a few beats before it stops. Other times, it's a whole rhythm. Dribble, pause, dribble, the hollow ring of the ball hitting a wall. If you're close enough, you might hear the squeak of shoes pivoting on the ground, quick turns made by someone who isn't there. Some witnesses swear the sound grows sharper as they move toward it, only to fade away when they cross a certain invisible line in the yard. Rangers have walked the whole space during these moments and found nothing. No ball, no windborne trash, just the quiet weight of the bay pressing against the island. The obscure version of the story is stranger. There are a few accounts, mostly from former maintenance workers, of an entire game unfolding in the mist. Figures, barely more than shapes, move back and forth in the fog. They're not solid, more like silhouettes cut from old film, but their movements are purposeful, coordinated, like men who've played together for years. One worker described hearing laughter from the group, a sound full of life, before the figures dissolved into the gray, as if the wind had erased them. In some tellings, it's not basketball at all, but baseball, faint cracks of a bat, the low calls between players, even the sound of a ball smacking into a leather glove. Perhaps the yard's ghosts swap sports depending on the weather. The unresolved mystery is tied to a game that ended in violence. In the early 1950s, an argument during a basketball match escalated into a fight. One inmate was stabbed with a makeshift shiv, right there in the yard, while others scattered. Officially, the game never resumed that day, but some say it's been resuming ever since. The phantom dribbling always seems to start near the same corner where the fight broke out. There's another oddity. In rare cases, the phantom game doesn't just make noise, it leaves marks. Rangers have found faint, dusty outlines of footprints on the concrete in places that had been spotless the day before. The prints never lead anywhere, no starting point, no exit, just a few scattered shapes as if players were frozen mid-action before vanishing. Standing here now, with the wind combing through your hair and the gulls screaming their opinion overhead, you can imagine it. You hear a ball bouncing once, twice, 3 times clear enough that your body almost reacts, head turning automatically toward the sound. There's nothing, just the flat expanse of the yard and the distant white rush of waves against rock. You start to walk toward the cell block, and behind you, the bouncing starts again, faster this time, as though someone's running the court. You don't turn. There's a kind of respect in leaving the game alone, letting the players keep their small slice of normal in a place that tried to take normal away. Gentle joke to ease the tension. If you do see a ghost dribble a basketball, just know you'll never block their shot. They've got the home court advantage. As you step back inside, the air changes immediately, cooler, quieter, heavier. The yard stays behind, holding its invisible scoreboard, waiting for the next game to begin. The morgue sits tucked away near the old hospital ward, small enough that you could mistake it for a storage shed if you didn't know better. Its doorway yawns into a room with no windows, the kind of place where sound seems to get caught in the corners. The air is cooler here, not freezing, but with that faint, dry bite that hints at its original purpose. Inside, there's a single steel table in the center and 3 gurney-sized drawers built into the wall. The drawers are old paint flaking, handles dull from decades of disuse. They haven't been opened in years, and yet people swear they hear them moving. The well-known haunting is the silent gurney. Guides and visitors alike tell of being in the morgue when a soft, rolling sound begins like metal wheels on tile. It's never loud, more like a patient, deliberate push across the floor. It always seems to come from just behind you, and no matter how quickly you turn, there's nothing there. Sometimes the sound is accompanied by a faint creak, the kind a cart makes when its weight shifts. A few visitors have even felt a soft brush against the back of their calves, as though something had just rolled past them in the dark. The obscure version is more unsettling. A handful of staff members have claimed that, during after-hours checks, they've heard the gurney move and the metallic clink of one of the morgue drawer handles turning. One ranger said she watched the middle drawer tremble slightly, as if something inside had shifted. When she stepped closer, the trembling stopped. There's also a small group of paranormal investigators who swear they recorded a single, shallow breath coming from inside one of the closed drawers. They couldn't agree on which one it seemed to change depending on who was listening. The unresolved mystery stems from the fact that the morgue was rarely used for its intended purpose. Most deaths on Alcatraz were handled quickly, with bodies transferred to the mainland. Yet records show at least 4 inmates were kept here overnight during storms that delayed transport. 2 of those deaths were from violent incidents, one in the yard, one in the mess hall. Some believe the silent gurney is simply replaying the moments when those bodies were moved. Others wonder if something was placed in the morgue that was never meant to leave and is still waiting to be taken out. Standing in the room, you can hear the subtle hum of the building settling. Every drop of water in a pipe somewhere above you echoes here like it's inside your skull. You look at the gurney drawers and can't help wondering what it would feel like to hear a slow, metallic slide in the dark, knowing the handles are supposed to be rusted shut. A sudden, faint sound, like the squeak of a wheel, slides through the silence. You hold still. It comes again, closer this time, then stops. The air feels thicker, like the room is leaning toward you. Gentle joke to cut the heaviness. If you ever do see the gurney roll by on its own, just pretend you're letting it go ahead in line. Politeness costs nothing. When you step back out into the corridor, the air feels lighter, but your footsteps sound sharper, as if the morgue is still listening. Behind you, the cool dark holds its quiet, and the steel drawers wait, patient as ever. The hospital ward of Alcatraz is a place that wears its silence differently. It's not the sharp, echoing quiet of the cell blocks or the hollow stillness of the morgue. It's a muted, heavy quiet, like a blanket you didn't ask for draped over your shoulders. Long hallways branch into small rooms, each one lined with metal-framed beds, chipped white paint curling away from the walls like peeling skin. Even in the daylight, this part of the prison feels dim. The windows are narrow, and the sunlight that filters in seems to lose its nerve before it reaches the floor. The air smells faintly of rust and something older, an almost medicinal tang that clings to the back of your throat. The well-known haunting here is the restless bed. It starts with the soft squeak of a mattress shifting, like someone rolling over under thin sheets. The sound comes without warning, and can happen in any of the rooms, though one near the far end of the ward is mentioned most often. Visitors describe seeing the frame tremble ever so slightly, as if under a restless sleeper's weight. On rare occasions, the blanket stiff from decades of disuse will slide a fraction of an inch toward the pillow. No one's ever seen it move more than that, but the fact that it moves at all is enough to keep people glancing over their shoulders here. The obscure variant is tied to an inmate named John Dutch Lamb. Dutch was a notorious hypochondriac who reportedly faked illness just to spend time in the hospital ward, where the rules were looser and the guards less tense. He died in his sleep here in the early 1940s peacefully, according to the official report. But some staff members have claimed that during late-night patrols, they've heard low mumbling in Dutch's old room. One ranger described it as half prayer, half complaint, with the occasional chuckle mixed in. When they stepped inside, the bed in the corner was shaking lightly, as if someone had just shifted their legs. The room was empty, of course, but the smell of antiseptic hung heavier than usual. The unresolved mystery involves a rare, unnerving phenomenon reported by multiple paranormal teams. The sudden drop in temperature isolated to a single bed. Even when the rest of the ward remains at its usual chilly but bearable level, one mattress will feel almost ice cold to the touch. It's not always the same bed. Either sometimes it's near the windows, sometimes against the wall. Some believe the restless bed is tied to Dutch. Others think the ward itself is holding on to all the last movements of those who spent their final hours here, playing them back in fragments. As you walk between the rows of frames, you can almost hear the faint, rhythmic tick of a heart monitor, a sound that has no business existing here, in a place where electricity hasn't flowed in decades. You know it's your imagination, but when the bed in the corner lets out a small, deliberate creak, you decide not to linger. There's a strange comfort in leaving the ward behind, stepping back into the more familiar halls of the prison. But even as you walk away, you picture that one bed still shifting, still waiting for someone who will never return. Gentle joke for the nerves. If you hear a ghost telling you to fluff the pillow, just take it as a good Yelp review for your ghost hosting skills. The corridor swallows you up, and the ward slips out of sight. The quiet here is different again, less smothering, more watchful. And somewhere behind you, a mattress sighs into place. Night has a way of leveling Alcatraz. Daylight sorts the island into departments administration up top, cell houses in ranks, yard to the side, lighthouse keeping counsel with weather. But after sundown, the edges blur. The wind threads everything together, the fog stitches the buildings into one wide breath, and the island feels less like a place and more like a single watchful mind. You stand where you began down near the dock, boards damp under your shoes, the ferry light a small promise across the dark water. Behind you, the prison stacks itself into shadow, block, tower, line, corner. The bay keeps its slow conversation with the rocks. And then, quietly, the island begins its nightly roll call. First, its footsteps far up in the administration building. Leather on wood, the steady cadence of a habit that still likes to be seen. Then the soft squeak of a gurney wheel from the hospital wing, 3 feet, and stop. The way a memory pulls up at your shoulder to check your pulse and your manners. In D block, something taps a bar. 3 clean notes that fall into your ribs like pebbles into a bucket. The yard replies with 2 hollow dribbles, quick and sure. In the mess hall, a tray rides a counter you can't see and ends with a bright, decisive clang as if the island is signing its name. The lighthouse gives one long breath of horn that parks in your bones. Somewhere up there, a soul knocks twice on a rung that isn't installed anymore. You don't need a map to follow it. Your ears walk the hill, your nerves cross the gallery, your breath rests a hand on 14D's door and doesn't push. Even your sense of posture remembers the gun rail and straightens without being asked. Gentle joke for courage. By now, you could teach a class called How to Behave, so a ghost will grade you on a curve. The well-known version of Alcatraz's grand legend lives right here in this layering, this nightly orchestra. Guides will tell you about the Alcatraz hum, a chorus of disparate haunts acting like one long story. Warden in his office, shadow on the catwalk, nurse in the ward, keeper at the lamp, inmate in the hole. The island keeps time, everything else joins in. People swear it's louder on anniversaries, the Battle of Alcatraz each May, the last inmate transfer in March, the closing day in June. They come to listen and leave with a noise tucked into their jacket like contraband they didn't mean to steal. An obscure interpretation pushes the idea one step stranger. Folklorists call it a self-haunt. The island isn't a stage for ghosts. The island is the ghost. Not a collection of human leftovers, but a single, continuous presence shaped by custody, discipline, and the geometry of containment. The footsteps and knocks and dribbles are how the mind of the place checks on itself. The keeper carries the light because warning is the body's oldest reflex. The head nurse takes a pulse because vigilance is how you love something that keeps breaking. The catwalk paces because order is how you sleep without doors. It's a useful theory right up until you're alone by the dock and a specific whisper, timid, human, pleading slides out of the corridor behind you and says your name like it learned it 5 minutes ago. Then the island stops being one thing and turns back into 100 small ones, each with a face you can't quite hold. Unresolved mysteries like to wait near the ferry. There's the question of the 1,962 escape. Did Morris and the Anglin brothers make it? Photographs, affidavits, cousins with Polaroids, and a talent for holidays. Alcatraz answers with weather and distance. There's the ledger that shouldn't have an extra tally mark, the casing that shouldn't be on the floor, the cabinet that shouldn't rearrange itself, the menu board that shouldn't write coffee in a hand nobody owns. Are they pranks? Are they patterns? The island shrugs the way rock shrugs. I have time. You do a little roll call of your own. Remember the broken flashlight from earlier? It would still fail right now, because stories respect comic timing. The low thing in the utility corridor, it would still cut across your beam and make your ankles consider changing careers. The bright-eyed man in 14D, he would still make your lungs negotiate with air. And the lady with no eyes in the window, wrong legend, wrong coast, but evening love's a crossover episode. You smile in spite of yourself. Because a quiet, sleepy laugh is a good anchor when the dark leans close. A gull executes a rude opinion overhead. You take it as a benediction. There's a last, widely told variant that insists Alcatraz goes silent right before dawn, not quiet silent. The hour has different names depending on who's telling it: guard hour, blue hour, change of watch. For 60 heartbeats, the island holds still. No tray, no bell, no cough, no horn. The lighthouse pauses between sweeps, and you feel the pause as a room opening in your chest. Some say that's when prayers work best here. Others say that's when you'll catch a glimpse of the island, without its history, just rock and wind and gull. Either way, when the sound returns, it feels like the world remembered where it put you. Another obscure thread says the ferry captains know a sign. If the lamp in the captain's office window, long dark, shows a half-light at 4 a.m., the bay will be treacherous by sunrise. Weather station data disagrees. The captains shrug. The island keeps giving weather reports in a language that doesn't fit a spreadsheet. And the last debate you can't put down, even when you try, is the place haunted because of pain or because of attention? Did suffering call the echoes into being, or did decades of staring at these rooms carve grooves that sound now fills? The answer is an untidy yes. People made a story here, and then listened so hard the story learned to talk back. The ferry horn answers the lighthouse. Time to go. You turn to the water, and the dockboards creak with a cordiality that didn't exist an hour ago. Behind you, one door in the cell house shuts itself with a soft finality. Above, something on the gallery takes 8 paces and stops as if counting you out. Up on the hill, 3 slow knocks ask the fog to be reasonable. In the ward, a blanket remembers its job and settles a fraction of an inch. You step onto the ferry. The line groans forward. A ranger clicks a counter, the metal tongue of it crisp as a promise. The island doesn't wave. It holds a gaze older than that. One last gentle joke for the crossing. If your phone snaps a photo on its own and auto-tags it portrait, do not argue you've been well-mannered all night. Let the algorithm have its little haunting. The engine shudders. The wake yanks white lines out of black water. As Alcatraz slides backward into fog, a lantern-yellow glow moves once along the base of the lighthouse and goes out as if someone cupped a hand around it. The horn recites a line you'll hear again when your fan hums in the dark. You won't bring anything home, you tell yourself, but you already have. Let the bay grow quiet now. Let the wake fall back into itself, the way a sheet settles after someone stands up. You've carried a long night in your shoulders, footsteps and trays, and a light that refused to blink, and it's time to set it down, gently, just beside the bed where the ordinary lives. Breathe in, easy. There's salt in the air, if you want there to be, a cool draft that belongs to hallways far away from your room. Breathe out, slower. Hear the fan turn a circle. Call it a lighthouse if it helps. If a floorboard talks, let it be just the house remembering how to be a house. If the dark at the door feels deep, remind it that tonight it's only a doorway, and that's enough. Alcatraz is smaller from here. Not gone, good stories don't go, but softened, like the sound of waves when you close the window. The footsteps thin to a rhythm you can fold inside your breath. The tray becomes a spoon in the sink. The knock at the lighthouse is only a branch testing the glass. Even the hospital's quiet turns kind. The way silence can when it remembers it's for resting. If your mind wanders back up the hill, let it walk with a friend at its elbow. Let the island keep its watch without you for a while. It's good at that. It has practice. You made it across. You kept your posture, your humor, your small, brave promises to yourself. That's enough traveling for one night. Close your eyes, let the ferry's engine fade to the softer sound of your own heartbeat, finding an easier pace. If a name floats up: a warden, a worker, someone without a ledger, wish them a good round of their late shift and send them back to the fog. You're home. The light is yours to turn off, and the dark is friendly again.